Hi, it's Rob from the Bush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Flesh Tearers Primaris Intercessor. So the first colour that we're going to use is Citadel Khorne Red. This is going to be to do his torso, his legs and his arms. The shoulders and the head will of course be black. As a chapter that I've always wanted to paint a miniature from this, so I'm quite pleased to finally be getting around to doing one. But they are such a great chapter, the lore behind them is great. So if you don't know too much about the Flesh Tearers, have a read and see what you reckon. Now we're going to use some Vallejo Beige Brown. We're going to paint all his skin with this. To make sure it gets a nice smooth coat. There's a lot of details on his face there that we're going to be using later on when we start shading and re-highlighting. So just want to get a nice smooth layer on there. I was tempted to do Flesh Tearers for the new Indomitus box, but I think I am actually going to go with the Knights of the Chalice, who are almost Blood Angels colours, but they'll work well alongside the Lamenters, I think. Next up we're going to be using some Citadel Mournfang Brown. This is going to be used to do the pouches and his holster. We're also going to use it to do the scabbard for his knife. Usually that kind of Roman colour with the red and the gold on it, but instead we're just going to go for the standard Mournfang brown pouches now. Once you've got a nice smooth layer of that on, it's on to the next colour. Next we're going to be using some Citadel Retributor Armour. This mainly to do details on him, so the skull on the Aquila on his front, and the skull and wing on the side of his bolt rifle. We're also going to do the hilt of the sword, and the little top piece on the handle there, the pommel. Or dagger rather. There's not really too much to do with this colour, but it does add a few little details that make them stand out on a model. So worth using a little bit of gold just to give that a bit of shine. You're also going to do the bolt rounds in the magazine too. Now we're going for a little bit of Vallejo Model Air Chrome. We're going to paint all of the silvery metallic, so the blade of the dagger, also the metallic parts on the power pack and the bolt rifle. Also do the bits around the back of the Space Marines heads as well, this colour, so when you've got no helmet on you can see all the little bits clamped to the back of the head or over their ears. I always do that in the same colour too. Now we're going to use some Citadel Warpstone Glow, and this is just to do the eye lenses, so it's a very quick layer this. Just want to get each of those eye lenses done. I'll be fine. The final base colour we're going to use is Vallejo Black. We're just going to use this to re-black all of the areas where the paint's gone over. Now because the spray is different to the Vallejo Black, I'm also going to go over the normal black areas that haven't had other paint on there, just because the undercoat that I've used for the black is slightly shiny. You can see the bit of a shine on it there, while the Vallejo Black that I use is incredibly matte, so you can see a distinct difference when they're side by side. So as I'm going through here, I'm just going to go over all of that so that they are all the same colour. Now we're going to start with the shades. I'm going to start with Citadel Biel-Tan Green, and this is just to shade those eye lenses. Once again, it's a very quick layer. Now we're going to use Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I'm going to use this to do all of the gold, and also all of the Mournfang Brown. Here's a great shade. This one's got a million uses. If they ever stop making it, it'd probably ruin all of my painting because I use the shade so much. It's always handy to have a nice little stockpile in the background there. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Nuln Oil, and this is just going to be to do any of the silvery metallics. So any of the bits in the model air chrome, you just want to give that a good coating just to dull that down and get the shade into the recesses. Once you've got that shade on, it's time to move on to the next colour. So the final shade is going to be Citadel Violet, and this is just to do all of the Khorne Red. I do prefer the Flesh Tearers to have that slightly darker red look to them. I know some of the artwork shows them with lighter armour, some of them shows them with darker armour, but I do like the deeper red colour for their armour. And once you've applied all of the Violet, you can start reapplying the colours back to the armour. So the first colour to reapply is Citadel Khorne Red. We're just going to be making sure that we leave the Violet in the recesses and in the areas that aren't going to be hit by any light. So like under the legs and that kind of thing, and under the arms. You're just going to apply a nice smooth layer of Khorne Red. And once you've finished with the Khorne Red, it's on to the next colour. So next up we've added a little bit of Wazdakka Red to the Khorne Red. We're just going to start highlighting this here. Now while you did a lot of the surface area with the Khorne Red, you're now only going to be applying this to sort of the areas where the light would be catching it. So you're going to have a lot more shade in this, but you want to be leaving the Khorne Red and the shades in the recesses. Now we're just going to go on to pure Wazdakka Red. While I start off doing this mainly on the very top and down some of the very edges where it'll be catching the light, I spread this out so you're covering about 50% of the area that you've just covered with the previous layer. So this becomes another broader highlight, and then we'll be doing edge highlights after this one. Keep that going, and when we come back we'll go on to the next layer. So now we're just going to add a little bit of white to the Wazdakka Red. I'm going to do one final edge highlight. All you want to be doing really is catching all the edges that will be catching the light, so the top edges of things. That's just to give it a look as though the light is coming down from above and catching on the edges of the armour. So you don't want to be doing highlights along all the bottom edges. I do the bottom edge of the armour here just because the edge of that sticks out more than the bits below it kind of thing, so I always do an edge highlight on that too. But generally it's all the edges that will be catching the light from above. Now I'm going to start with Vallejo Beige Brown and start reapplying the colour to his face. So here I'm using a Citadel medium layer brush. It's a new brush, so it's got a really good point on it. But I'll use this to start off with, and then we can move to a thinner brush when we're doing the smaller highlights later on. And once you've finished with this layer, we're going to come back and start doing the highlights for it. Now we're going to mix a little bit of Cadian Fleshtone with the beige brown just to lighten that up, and then we're going to start doing the first layer of highlights. So with this you want to be highlighting maybe about 50% or 60% of the area that you've just put the Vallejo beige brown. And you're only going to be trying to put it on the areas that will be catching the light more than others, so the tops of the cheeks, the tops of his top lip there, the top edges of his chin, the bottom edge of the jawbone there where that sticks out a little bit more in his ear, and obviously the top of his scalp and around the sides too. Now we're going to add a little bit more Cadian Fleshtone to the previous mix. I'm going to do exactly the same but with a slightly smaller highlight. This time we're using the Army Painter Wargamer character brush, so you've got that thinner edge, the thinner brush, just to try and get as thinner highlight lines as possible. And you're probably going to be doing about 50% of the previous layer. And finally we're adding a little bit of Vallejo White to the previous mix. I'm just going to start doing the final highlight on his skin. So this is a really small highlight, and it's just to bring out some of the little features, creases in the skin, the very edges to his jawline, and some of the little wrinkles and creases on his forehead and nose. You can also use that to put like the little crease lines at the edges of the eyes as well. Now I've come back, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror and paint the tongue in his mouth. And we're going to highlight that with a little bit of Citadel Emperor's Children, like so. Continuing to work on his face still, we're going to use Vallejo White. We're going to use this to do his eyes and also his teeth. I think we actually do the teeth first because we're working on his mouth, so we're just going to do the teeth for the time being and come back and do the eyes. I was amazed when the Primaris came out that they all had individual teeth. It was the first time I'd ever noticed that. Once they're completed, it's on to the next layer. So I'm going to be using Vallejo White here, and it is going to be to do his eyes. So you always want to be dragging the brush away from the point and going in a steady motion there. I find it very easy to do that way, and I have to rotate the miniature to do the other way. It's all about getting the figure to the point where your brush stroke, where your hand is sitting naturally, doesn't feel awkward. So you want to have the figure in a way that means your wrist is going to be comfortable when you're putting that stroke on. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black just to put the pupil onto his eye. Now here I wanted to make him look a bit crazed, so I've tried to put the pupils towards the bottom of the eye, so there's a lot more white of the eye showing. Makes it look like he's maybe screaming at someone who's on the floor after he's just hacked at them with the knife a little bit or something. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm just going to fill in this little wound running down the front of his face, like so. And I've used a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red mixed with Cadian Fleshtone. And I'm just going to be doing a little bit of that on a little scar line that he seems to have on his cheek there. Now we're going to start working on the pouches, so we're going to use Citadel Mournfang Brown to start reapplying that colour back to them. You can see the two little wrinkles on the holster there, the two little sunken areas. I've left the shade in there and try and leave the shade in all the recesses. So I'm not too sure what happened with the following parts for this, but basically we do the usual thing of adding Rakarth flesh to the Mournfang Brown to highlight, but I'll throw a video of how to do that up later next week, I think. So we're now going to move on to Citadel Retributor Armour. I'm going to start reapplying the gold to all the decorations on him. So for the pouches you'd do Mournfang brown to get the base colour back on. Then you would mix a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh with the Mournfang brown and do one set of highlights with that, then a little bit more Rakarth flesh and just do that around the very edges of each part. So you'll see it on the figure as it's rotated around, but that should have been 2 sections of video prior to this one, but I've no idea where they are. So with the Retributor armour finished, it's now moving on to Citadel Liberator gold to highlight. You just want to be doing this around the edges and a little bit into the area where you put the Retributor armour. Not to forget those bolt shells in the magazine there either. And finally, to highlight the gold, we're going to be adding some Vallejo Modeler Chrome to the Liberator gold. And we're just going to be doing very extreme highlights on this, just on like the tips of the feathers on the wing there, on upper edges of things, basically the areas that are going to catch the light a little bit more. You're just going to put a little highlight of this on. Like so. Now going to use some Vallejo Black, and we're just going to repaint all of the armour and make sure there's no other colours on there, so we can start working on that next. If you did this earlier on, you don't have to do that now. This is just a catch up from where I've used the shades and things like that, and different things have gone onto the black, so you may need to just touch that black up a little bit more, just so you've got it all a consistent black. Now we're going to use some Vallejo German Grey, and this is going to be the first highlight going onto it. So you want to think about where the light's going to be catching those black sections and applying it to them. As always, we're just going to be using the German Grey to highlight the seals between the armour plates. We're going to do an extra highlight on everything else just to make them different. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey, and this is going to be to do the edges and things like that on the black areas. So you want to think about which edges would be catching the light if it was shining from above, and then you want to highlight those edges. You see there, I've put a little bit of blob of Mechanicus Standard Grey on there. If you just wet your brush and then sort of scrape that out with the brush, you'll be able to get that sorted out in no time. Now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo Modeler Chrome, and this is just going to be to add a little bit of silver edging to the helmet, because I'm going to work on that for a moment. We're also going to do a little bit of silver down the edge of the blade. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Carrobugg Crimson. I'm going to put a little bit of red around his eyes, and also a little bit of a red trickle running down the wound and from the wound on his face. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm just going to use this to go down the piece that's been taken out of his helmet at the front there. Very quick layer, that one. And once we finish that, we're going to start working on the lenses. I'm going to use some Citadel Warpstone Glow. This is going to be to reapply the colour back to the lenses, You also want to make sure that you're leaving some of the Biel-Tan green shade around the edges of each lens. You're just colouring in the sort of middle 90% of it or so. Like so. Now we're going to add a little bit of white to the Warpstone glow, and we're going to reapply a highlight, or apply a highlight I should say, to those lenses. So I'm highlighting these in exactly the same way as I would do a normal lens. Obviously you've got the split straight the way through one of them. So the normal way would be to do a crescent at the back end of the lens with this colour, and then we're going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix, and we're going to add a slightly smaller crescent where we've just applied it, so maybe about 50% of the size of the crescent of the previous layer. And this is kind of going in like the back 3/4 of the lens. I'm just going to be using a little bit of Vallejo White. This just to put the final reflections on the lenses. So you're going to put a spot at the front of each lens, and you're also going to put a little bit on the crescent, so maybe half of the previous highlight on there. I'll post a link to the lenses video because you couldn't see some of that quite clearly on there. I'm going to use a little tiny bit of Vallejo Model Air Chrome. And this is actually to do the edge of the knife. Apologies, thought we'd already done that part on the previous one, but just to put the edges on the knife, give them a shine. We're also going to do the buttons on the pouches and these little sockets on each side of his armour. Next up, we're going to use some Vallejo White. I'm going to start working on that chapter badge. Now there is going to be a video coming on Sunday, so this doesn't show the whole thing, mainly because it's probably about 15-16 minutes to paint it in full. So here's the basic way of applying it for me, is I will do the full circle, get that nice and smooth, and then once you've done the full circle you can start working on the teeth of the individual parts of the blade. Now I'm going to use some Vallejo Black to just go around that and tidy up the edges of those little teeth on the blade. Now here there's probably about maybe 5 minutes between where the last video cut off and where this one starts. So because it's not showing you the full thing, there is going to be a full video on how to do these teeth and things like that. That'll be coming up on Sunday. It's just a bit long-winded for the actual miniature painting video. So you're tidying up them edges, and if you need to add a little bit of white, then do so. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to do that blood drop in the centre of the saw blade. With this you can just do a triangle at the top, do one line straight down, remember always dragging away from the tip of the brush. Once you've dragged that down, do the same on the other side so you get the angle that you want for the teardrop or the blood drop. And then once you've got the angle right, you can do the curve at the very bottom of the blood drop. Once again, when you've finished doing that, if you need to touch it up like I've done there, use a little bit of white and just touch up around the edge of that to get the right shape for it. Now we're going to start adding a little bit of gore to the model. Now the Flesh Tearers being the lunatics that they are, I wanted to show him kind of blood splattered and looking like a bit of a maniac. So for this we're going to use Citadel Blood for the Blood God. If you look at blood spatter and things like that and how it sprays, then you'll see the sort of like the gentle curves and the little arcs that you get. Also the spots, individual droplets that'll be flying everywhere, so if he's going at someone with that dagger, then he's going to have quite a bit sprayed on him. So now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo White. This probably should have come beforehand because I'm going to go over it and add a little bit of spatter to these knee pads as well. But we're just going to put the little battle line marking on his knee here. So just going to paint that white arrow onto the knee pad. Splattered a little bit of paint onto the magazine there, which I'll touch up in a moment. But the way I'm painting up this knee pad is exactly the same way as I usually do the shoulder pads. So I'll link the video to that here so that you can see that, because I've already got an iconography video for that particular part. So we're going to stick with white again. We're now going to start putting his squad number onto his kneecap. So he's going to be squad number 2. This is going to be using the same markings as the guy shown in the Blood Angels Codex. So we're going to go for the number 2 there. And once you've got the shape and you're happy with it, take a bit of time putting these numbers on. But once you've got the shape happy, you can do that vertical line down, of course dragging the paintbrush away from the tip so you can get that nice straight line. With the number done and the arrow done, it's now time to add his company to the battle line marking there. He's going to have the green blood drop, like so. And that is the finished Flesh Tearers Space Marine. Quite happy with how he turned out, but we'll put up a video to how to paint the pouches and also link in the video of how to do the battle line marking, and his chapter badge will be on Sunday. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much.